Mike here, and welcome back to the channel. So today we are going to be doing a video that I have been putting off a little bit until Endgame had been out in theaters long enough. I think it's been long enough since it's been about a month, so most people have seen it. If you haven't seen it, obviously spoiler warnings. But I had announced that I would be doing the final video for the Journey to Endgame, which would be a full spoiler review plus recap of Avengers Endgame. So I will be doing that here now. And this will be the last video that will go on that playlist, and then we will be done with this for a very long time, or at least until Spider-Man Homecoming comes out, or Spider-Man Far From Home. So let's just everything leading up to it. Obviously, this is the direct sequel to Infinity War. This picks up immediately after the events of the snap, and the first thing we actually see, even before the opening credits, are a shot of Hawkeye and his family having a little cookout. They do show that Hawkeye has the ankle bracelet because they do mention that he took the plea deal, much like Ant-Man, after he was arrested following the airport battle in Captain America Civil War. So he is back on his farm with his family. They're talking. He's teaching his daughter how to shoot a bow. And then suddenly people just start disappearing around him. And we basically see that then he starts, freaking out and stuff like that. He doesn't know what's going on. And then go through the opening credits. And right after we go into what the Avengers are essentially up to. We see a little bit of we go to Tony Stark on the Milano, the Star Lord ship. Him and Nebula are kind of just floating in space. They're stuck pretty much out in space. Tony Stark is still trying to recover from his stab wound that Thanos inflicted on him during the battle on Titan in Infinity War. There's a few little good scenes between him and Nebula. There's one where they're trying to play like paper football. That's kind of funny. But that's where we also see the message from the trailer, where Tony Stark leaves the message on his Iron Man helmet for Pepper Potts, because he doesn't know if he's going to make it back to Earth. He doesn't think he's going to anyway. And this is when we kind of get uh, the, the there are certain characters in this movie that a lot of people thought were going to be in it a lot more. Captain Marvel is one of those characters, but she does show up early on in the film, and she finds Tony Stark and Nebula floating in space and brings them back to Earth. So as she's bringing them back to Earth, we kind of check in with the other Avengers. Steve Rogers has shaved off his beard, and everybody is kind of gathered at the Avengers facility, which is in upstate New York. Everybody that survived, anyway, the final battle. So Nebula delivers them, and they have a little bit of a back and forth. Or not sorry, not Nebula. Captain Marvel delivers Nebula and Tony Stark back to Earth. Pepper Potts and Tony Stark get reunited, and then we immediately go into uh, them looking for Thanos. And this is 21 days after the events of the snap at this point, that we're seeing all the Avengers are back together. Um, and we get this really good scene that kind of is a callback to, because again, we've had a long time since we've seen Tony Stark and Captain America interacting with one another because of the events of Civil War. So this is really the first time they've even been in the same room together. And they basically go over this, and they figure out that they're trying to figure out how to get to Thanos and get the stones and stop him from doing anything else. And Tony Stark essentially kind of has this breakdown. Now, the thing is that he at this point he is emaciated. He hasn't had food or water in a number of days. He's hooked up to an IV bag, and he's sitting in a chair. It doesn't really look like he's able to do very much. Um, I'm not sure what is in relation to his Iron Man suit, if it's even possible for him to go into it right now because of all the damage it took on Titan. So he has this kind of back and forth with Steve Rogers, where he's really bitter and basically blames Steve Rogers for everything that's happened. And again, he's still dealing with the loss of Peter Parker and the loss of a majority of his friends. So it's kind of, and on top of that, his physical form is frail right now because of what happened to him. So he basically gets too excited, he passes out, and then we go into this little monologue where basically they find out that Rocket's able to track a signature to a far off planet that matches the same signature as the snap that Thanos did on Earth. So they are able to find out that Thanos is on this planet, and this is the planet that we see at the end of Infinity War, where Thanos, comes out of the little hovel there and he looks out at the sunset or the sunrise. Um, so the Avengers then go there. Now, there were some concerns. There's some early scenes. It's actually kind of funny to see Don Cheadle as War Machine kind of put Carol Danvers in her place, and she in this movie she kind of has a reoccurring theme where she comes in and says, "Is oh basically she comes in and says I'm the best," like more than a few times. And then the other Avengers pretty much tell her to shut the fuck up, which again, it's kind of funny. But they go to this far off planet and they find out that Thanos is actually not. He's just there alone. And then, again, this is where we see the shots of like his armor on the Scarecrow and stuff. A lot of really good visuals and a lot of callbacks to the comic. But we go and we look, and the Avengers essentially ambush Thanos, and Thor cuts off his arm that has the gauntlet on it. So the gauntlet has now been removed. So Thanos is basically he's in a headlock essentially from Carol Danvers, so he can't move, and all the other Avengers come in, and they see that the stones have been removed from the gauntlet. So they immediately ask Thanos what he did with them, and he basically said that he thought that the stones were too much of a not a distraction, but they were too much of like a temptation. So he snapped his fingers again, and he destroyed the stones with the stones. So you can see the results of it where at the end of Infinity War he doesn't look too bad. Like the Infinity Gauntlet is kind of fucked up and his arm's a little burned, but he's not too bad. In this, like the whole side of his face and shit is just completely torched. So he is royally messed himself up. And after hearing this and realizing that there's no way to bring their friends back, Thor then kind of snaps and decapitates Thanos with Stormbreaker, which is a really, really good scene. Which is a really, really good scene. And I remember Nebula just kind of everybody's kind of shocked. It's really interesting because you don't really see a lot of beheadings in the MCU, and Nebula's kind of shocked. He turns to him and says, "What did you do?" He says, "I did what needed to be done," and then he just kind of walks out like a boss, which I thought was really cool. Now there are some things that they did with Thor in this movie that I don't particularly like, but I'm going to get to those. So now here's the big thing that happens in the movie is we now jump 5 years into the future. So all of the people, and we knew there was going to be a time jump because of some stuff that we saw in the trailers, and I went over that in the video before. But we now jump 5 years into the future, and the first person we check in with is Tony Stark. So Tony Stark, he was in a frail state, so he did not make the trip to go kill Thanos. Back in 5 years prior, but now we see that he has a little house, he's settled down, he's married Pepper, and he has a daughter who is roughly 4 or 5, named Morgan. And this is kind of this is where Tony's arc has led him for the entirety of the MCU so far, is that he's always been fighting to separate himself from Iron Man, or from the responsibilities of being Iron Man after a certain point, uh, because he wanted to settle down and essentially get a life. Um, and now that that's happened, he has finally done that. He has gotten a life, and he has a little daughter, and you know, and Pepper, and they have a house on like a lake that's looks very nice. And so he's just kind of just living his life out there. They have a little bit of a tidbit of something that does show up later on in the movie when his daughter finds a mask, and Tony jokingly says that that's an anniversary gift for mommy. So we kind of know at that point that Pepper's getting a suit of armor at some point. Um, but moving past that, we basically kind of check up with them a little bit, and after that we go to another. basically we do a little bit of a checkup with all the Avengers, or all the major Avengers. So Tony Stark, then Captain America, who is basically in this kind of like a help group, and we basically get to see what the world is like 5 years after the snap. Is that people can't get over it? People are still trying to move on with their lives and accept that their loved ones are gone. Um, and Steve Rogers is in this sort of like support group with various people, and there's a cameo by Joe Russo. Um, where they're all talking about how they're dealing with the grief and all that. And 5 years later, again, the world is still kind of, shit because of what's happened. So, we move on from that. We go to Natasha, who is now essentially she's confined herself to the Avengers facility in upstate New York, and she's just in constant contact with the remaining Avengers, which include Captain Marvel, War Machine, and Rocket Raccoon, who are the ones that are kind of out in the galaxy just searching around for stuff. And she's basically resigned herself into kind of a role where she she's not going to get she knows that she's not over any of it, and she's so attached to this family that she's developed. She refers to it as a family, and it's the idea that she's never really had anybody for the majority of her life. She had Nick Fury for a little bit, and Hawkeye, but until she became an Avenger, she really didn't have a group of people around her that legitimately cared about her safety. Again, aside from those two, and it's heart wrenching in a way to kind of watch her character twist in the wind like that, just because you feel for it, because when those characters died, the ones that you were attached to, you felt kind of the same way, except that multiply that by a million, because in obviously to her character and everything in the film, it's real. So she's in contact. Show her in contact with a little bit of Captain Marvel, and she's asking specifically War Machine. There's a conversation she has with him about Hawkeye, because Hawkeye, essentially, after his family got dusted in Infinity War, he went rogue and just started killing everybody he could. Any kind of like scumbag, just eliminating crime bosses and stuff. So he has become the Ronin character now, and basically, Natasha has asked War Machine to try and track him down. But since he's obviously a former SHIELD agent and a super spy and all this other stuff, he's basically been able to avoid detection for a long time, for the duration of the 5 years. Because I guess she's been searching for him for almost since not long after the snap. So there's a lot of kind of baggage there that we see that Hawkeye's carrying, that he is just literally out for revenge and out to take out as many people as possible. And even War Machine is basically saying, like, is he even worth saving because of all the things that we know that he's done? And it's very interesting to see kind of that heel turn, because Hawkeye, again, he's been established really as this family man, and now we see that he's lost his family, and we see that he has done a total 180, where now he is just a ruthless killing machine. And I really liked his character in this movie. I'm glad that they spent a good amount of time on him, in a sense, because he didn't get any time in Infinity War. He was off with his family and stuff, and nothing. He didn't know about any of the events until everybody got dusted. So now after we've kind of caught up with most of the major players, we go and we catch up with Ant-Man, who has been stuck in the quantum realm. And what happens is we see an impound lot where Scott Lang's van is parked, and a rat runs over a control panel and activates the quantum portal that's in the back, and brings Scott Lang back into our realm, because that was basically his whole. But at the end of Ant-Man and the Wasp, in the post-credit scene, we see that Michael Douglas, Hank Pym, Janet Van Dyne, and Hope Van Dyne are all dusted, leaving him stuck in the quantum realm. So now Ant-Man has come back out of the quantum realm, but we see that he hasn't aged. And we don't know how long he's been in there initially, until he is kind of walking around. And basically, we find out that he's only been in his time passed in the quantum realm. He was only there for 5 hours. But in reality, 5 years had passed on the outside. So this is kind of where we start the time travel stuff, but it's very interesting when we see Scott Lang kind of wandering around in the streets, having no idea what's happened, and he actually goes and finds his daughter, and his daughter did not get dusted in the snap, and she is now 5 years older, and she's she's a teenager now. She's a young woman. She's 16 or 17 years old as opposed to being 11 or 12 in Ant-Man and the Wasp. So this is it's kind of a shell shock for him. But then Scott Lang takes the van and goes to the Avengers compound and makes contact with them. Uh, and after they talk, Scott basically explains that he thinks that because the quantum realm can manipulate time, that maybe they can use that to go get the stones. Because Steve and Natasha both explained to him what happened with Thanos and that he destroyed the stones. So naturally, all three of them only thinking that, the only person that came to mind on who can do this is Tony Stark. So they go to Tony's house, and this is actually when we really get that scene of Tony and his family, and then they show up. But the Tony Stark basically tells them to screw off because he wants nothing to do with any Avengers business, and he still kind of has a pseudo grudge with Steve Rogers over the Civil War stuff. So basically, he says he can't help them, and he doesn't think it's possible to actually make any kind of a time portal using the quantum realm because he doesn't think that it's possible to control aspects of the quantum realm down to that point. Now, having been turned away by Tony Stark, the group then goes to the next smartest person that they know that is still alive, which is Bruce Banner. And this is when we get the reveal of Bruce Banner as Professor Hulk. And for those of you who don't know who Professor Hulk is, or well, he's also called Mr. Fix-It, but um, basically, Professor Hulk is the Bruce Banner's mind in the Hulk's body. So this is a new version of Hulk, and we only see a couple of scenes. Obviously at the early parts of the film, um, we see Bruce Banner, and then we see him a couple of scenes. But most of the time, it is the CGI Hulk with Bruce Banner talking through him, or Mark Ruffalo. So we get an introduction scene, which is kind of interesting, where Hulk is still a celebrity despite the fact he failed to stop Thanos from erasing half the planet. So I don't really get that, other than the kind of joke where nobody knows who Ant-Man is. But he also explains basically that I think he said 18 months in a gamma chamber. Uh, after that he was able to combine the brains and the brawn together to form what he is now, and he agrees to help, even though it's really not his area of expertise. So things are going to go a little rocky. But now that is in motion, we go back to Tony Stark. And Tony Stark, there are amazing scenes in this with Robert Downey Jr. as Tony Stark. And this is the first one where he's washing the dishes in his kitchen, and he kind of fiddles around with the wand or whatever you have, the little spray wand, and he accidentally sprays a bunch of stuff that's on the counter behind that, and he notices that he sprayed a picture, and he picks it up, and it's a picture of him and Peter Parker. And this is kind of what stems Tony forward to investigate the quantum realm claims that they can manipulate time and have time travel. So you kind of get this sense of, uh, you know, he still feels guilt over this, that he couldn't save Peter Parker, that he couldn't save essentially almost his surrogate son. Again, this is well before he had children, um, and this is what stems him forward. And he winds up going, and he actually does figure it out. And he has this very deep conversation with Pepper Potts about, he says, "Oh, I can go throw it in the lake tomorrow. I can get rid of it. If it's just say the word and I can get rid of it." And Gwyneth Paltrow, or Pepper Potts, says that they came out of things. They have things really good, but a lot of people don't because of what happened, and he owes it to them to do this. And so now that Tony Stark's head is back in the game, we go back to the Avengers facility, and we see that the Avengers are coming back together in order to kind of test out this time travel plot line. There's actually a really funny scene where they experiment on Scott Lang to try and do the time travel, and he keeps coming back as, he comes back as a baby, and then he comes back as an old man, and for whatever reason things are messing with him physically. And there's some good dialogue by Bruce Banner as well, through the scenes. Hey, he comes back as a baby, he'll grow. No, I don't think they have the time for that. um, but then we have kind of the reuniting of the Avengers, the coming back together, where Tony Stark shows up after the first few failed experiments, and Steve Rogers is kind of pissed off, and he's standing outside, and Tony comes up to him and walks up to him. The first thing he says is, "You turned him into a baby, didn't you?" And Steve Rogers goes, "Among other things." Again, it's a great scene. It's a great back and forth. The Russo brothers are geniuses at writing dialogue for characters. Um, but Tony Stark basically explains that they're putting time through Scott Lang as opposed to putting Scott Lang through time. And he then goes into his trunk and grabs Captain America's shield and gives it back to him. Which again, he Captain America left the shield at the end of Captain America: Civil War because Tony basically told him that he didn't deserve it. So this is the first time again that we've had Cap with his shield back, which is a good thing. But with Tony Stark's help, the Avengers who are there are able to successfully test the time travel suit. Now, right before this happens, though, Natasha is able to find Hawkeye, and Hawkeye is in Tokyo. Eliminating Yakuza, and there's a few actually really good scenes where he's basically just murking Yakuza guys, and Black Widow shows up and basically says, he, you know, Clint says, "Don't give me hope," and she says, "Is we might have a way to save everybody." So Hawkeye is back in the mix now as well. So now at the Avengers facility, you have War Machine, Rocket, Iron Man, Captain America, Black Widow, Hawkeye, Hulk, Thor, who has again, they've gotten him back, but he is definitely a very different character than he was before, um, and Nebula. So Captain Marvel is apparently out in the universe somewhere doing something that we don't care about. Um, but Thor, on the other hand, now that he's been brought back into the fold, he has basically gone into a deep depression after the events of Infinity War, because now he can't get any. The Asgardians that are left are few and far between. They've settled in this place called New Asgard, which is basically just a fishing village in Norway, and Valkyrie essentially runs everything. She didn't get murdered in the snap, and she also wasn't killed by Thanos on Thor's ship at the beginning of Infinity War. So she is still there, and she's basically residing over New Asgard as Thor. Essentially, has now gotten rather fat. The joke was dad bod Thor, which is not far off from what it actually is. And there's actually a really cringy Fortnite joke in there as well. But he's basically bunking up with Korg and Meek, who, again, both of them apparently survived, even though we didn't see it. Um, and he's just drinking himself into a stupor every single day and doing absolutely nothing with himself. So now we have that Thor coming back in, and again, we still have kind of comedic dumb Thor, which I do like to an extent. But now, again, the problem I kind of have with it is, like, when he gets serious, it's less serious because again, it's like your dad got pissed. It's like a dude with a dad bod got pissed at like a little league game. I mean, that's what I feel like when he gets angry. It doesn't feel like a very good um, version. Although I think they will make him thin again because Chris Hemsworth is coming back for Thor 4/Guardians 3, and I'll explain that at the end. So now you have all of the original six Avengers back together, plus War Machine, Rocket, and Nebula. Um, but they basically concoct a plan that they are going to split into teams, and they are going to go back in time to various events to take the Infinity Stones from those events, bring them back to their time, use them with a Stark Tech gauntlet, um, and snap everyone back into existence. And then after they have snapped them back into existence, they will return the stones to the appropriate times. Um, Now, they've broken up into teams. So, what I'm going to do for this section of the review, and again, it's kind of similar to what I did with the, uh, kind of similar to what I did with the Infinity War review, where I went over each plot line related to each stone. So, I'm going to kind of do that again. Um, and I'm just going to go over each of the teams that are going through time in order to get these stones. So, starting off with the simplest one, we're going to go to the Reality Stone. Now, each of the remaining Avengers, plus the extras, each have experience with one of the Infinity Stones, and they know where they are. So the Avengers are able to kind of pinpoint what times they want to go to. So they're going to go to 2012 New York during the Battle of New York because they can get the Time Stone, the Space Stone, and the Mind Stone all in one. Because the Mind Stone is in Loki's scepter, the Space Stone is in the Tesseract, and the Time Stone is still at the Sanctum Sanctorum in Greenwich Village. So they have that, and then uh, the another group is going, like I said, going to Asgard in 2013 when Jane Foster is there, and she has the ether slash the Reality Stone inside of her body, so they can remove that there. And then they also have a team that is going to not Vormir. I forget the actual name of the planet, but the planet at the beginning of Guardians of the Galaxy 1, where Star Lord gets the Power Stone. And there's two teams that are going there because another team is going to take the Mulatto and go to Vormir to get the Soul Stone. So let's go over the easiest one. The easiest one is the Reality Stone, and Rocket and Thor go to Asgard in order to get the Reality Stone. Now, again, I like the banter kind of between Rocket and Thor. This is kind of a carryover from Infinity War, where Rocket has a conversation with him when they're going to the Forge planet, or the Asgardian Forge. But the thing that, again, it kind of irks me a little bit is Thor's demeanor in this film is that he really does, he's kind of sad in this film, and a sad in like a bad way. Where it's like he is the mighty Thor, and he looks like a fat homeless guy for 90% of the movie. And basically, him and Rocket go to Asgard, and they kind of sneak around for a little while until they find Jane Foster. Now, what happens is Thor kind of gets cold feet, and he runs away. Rocket then proceeds to go get the ether out of Jane Foster with some kind of a syringe device, it looks like. While Thor wanders around and winds up finding his mother. And he knows that his mother will die on that day. I believe it's on that day. Because, again, it takes place during Thor the Dark World. So she gets killed by the dark elf that has the Berserker crystal inside of it. So he then talks to her, and basically she knows immediately that he is a Thor from a different reality or a different timeline. I mean, not just because he's drastically overweight, but she kind of tries to reinforce to him that he's still a good person, and he can't forget that, and he can't, just keep wallowing in his pity. He has to pick himself up, and he has to be the man that he's supposed to be. Um, that might not necessarily mean that he's the ruler of Asgard, but it does mean that he can't just sit in a room and drink himself to death. Um, but going from that, we also have this moment there where he and again he brings it back, is he tries to see if he is still worthy, and he does this by bringing Mjolnir to him while he's in 2013, and basically says that he's going to borrow it for a little bit. Um, which again doesn't make a whole lot of sense, but it does set up a very good moment at the end of the movie. So now that he has Mjolnir and he realizes that he is still worthy to hold it, because he doesn't need to be worthy to hold Stormbreaker, because doesn't have an incantation on it like Mjolnir did. So he now believes that he is still worthy, and he kind of has a new lease on his life. At the same time, Rocket is being chased by guards. So now that they've gotten the ether, those two then travel, or the Reality Stone. Those two then travel the back to the Avengers facility. Which again, the way that the time travel works is they shrink down with Pym particles and they go through time and then come back. So now they're coming back again. They all come back at the exact same time because they're all going back to the exact same time that they left. So uh, now we go over to the groups, the two groups that are going to the Power Stone planet. So this is where it kind of gets complicated. So Black Widow and Hawkeye each are a team, and they go off to get the Soul Stone on Vormir in the Milano, where War Machine and Nebula stay on the planet and try to go get the Power Stone. Now I'm going to do the Soul Stone first because it's a more clear cut, and then I will go over the Power Stone. So Hawkeye and Black Widow go to Vormir in order to get the Soul Stone. They land. Kind of the same thing that happened when Thanos and Gamora went there. They go, they find the Red Skull. He basically explains what they have to do, and Hawkeye and Black Widow, you know, we can kind of get the idea that each one of them is going to want to sacrifice themselves because neither one of them wants the other one to die. So it then goes into kind of a oh, he's going to do it. Oh, she's going to do it. Oh, he's going to do it. Because they're both kind of fighting each other to get to the cliff face where they have to kind of dive off and kill themselves. And at the very end of it, Hawkeye is hanging on to Black Widow with one hand, and he can't pull her up. He's holding on to he's on the cliff face at this point, and he's holding on to a line that's attached to the cliff face to make sure they both don't fall. And then Natasha basically uses her feet and forces herself off the wall. She falls back down and hits the bottom of the canyon and is killed. And again, we have a very similar shot to what we had with Nebula in Avengers: Infinity War, where we see her on the ground and a little pool of blood behind her, and that's about it. And then Hawkeye goes through kind of the same vision questy thing that Thanos did, and he wakes up with the Soul Stone, and then he leaves the planet and goes back to the Avengers facility. So now we go over to the Power Stone. Now the Power Stone, basically, they don't know exactly where it is, but Star Lord is the one that finds it. So they're going back to this is 2014. So they're going back to the exact moment that Star Lord uh, found the Power Stone. So War Machine and Nebula kind of just wait inside the temple for Star Lord to come in, and when he finally basically shows them where it is, they knock him unconscious, and Nebula is able to remove the little uh, device from inside of its chamber because she has a robotic arm, so it doesn't hurt her when she reaches her arm in and grabs the little device or the little ball that has the Power Stone in it. And then we see that War Machine takes the Power Stone and he takes that back with him to the Avengers facility. But just as Nebula is about to go back, she gets this strange message in her brain. Uh, she basically gets. We find out that essentially her mind is hooked up to a neural network that's also hooked into Thanos's ship, essentially. So Nebula hooked into a neural network from the past, but that means both of her that means her counterpart and her are both hooked into the same neural network. So again, this is a little confusing, but it does factor into the end of the film. So because her mind has linked to the neural network, it basically overloads her brain and she passes out. This is when Thanos realizes what's happening because his nebula, the nebula that is still loyal to him at this point, gives him this information. And they then go capture the past nebula and send the other nebula back in her place. Uh, and this is a key for the end of the movie, for that final battle that we see in the trailers. Because this nebula is now an agent for Thanos, and Thanos now knows exactly what happens in the future, that he succeeds in getting the Infinity Stones and snapping his fingers, and that the Avengers are trying to undo it through time travel. So he essentially has the entire plot now, and he is ready to do his intervening. Um, So now Nebula goes back to the present time. So now we jump to the final location, which is the Battle of New York, and we have again three teams that split off. So uh, actually, kind of two teams, a little bit more like three. So Hulk, Iron Man, Captain America, and Ant Man all go to the Battle of New York. Hulk's responsibility is to go get the Time Stone. Tony Stark and Ant Man are going to go get the Tesseract, and Captain America is going to go get Loki's scepter. Now, this has a lot of callbacks to a lot of different things because we have Captain America back in his Avengers suit, which he only wore really then in that one film. Um, we have all the other characters kind of sneaking around. We have some moments from Avengers that we see, like Loki getting captured and some various other things. But let's go with the easiest one, which is Hulk. So Hulk goes to get the Time Stone. Now, Hulk goes to the Sanctum Sanctorum, but this is well before Stephen Strange uh, is there, and he meets the Ancient One, who is at this sanctum, or runs it at this point in time. We don't know exactly. So he doesn't know anything about her, so he basically says that he's going to be taking the time stone if she won't give it to him. And she then proceeds to do kind of what she did with Stephen Strange, where she knocks Bruce Banner's soul out of his body and gives him an out of body experience. Now, Banner then tries to debate with her back and forth about the importance of the stones, and she says that yes, he does need them, but if they remove the stone, then they will create an alternate timeline where the stone doesn't exist, and it could be worse than what they have already. And Bruce Banner basically says that they are going to return them to the moments that they were taken, and she still doesn't want to give it to him until he says that Strange gave the stone to Thanos. And this kind of irks her a little bit. And this is kind of a good scene because she is one of those people that thought that Stephen Strange was the best of them and would always be. And she realizes that the only reason why he would give that stone to Thanos would be because he knew he had to for them to win. So she, in turn, gives the time stone to Hulk and puts him back in his body. And he then goes back to the other Avengers. Now, at the meantime, Tony Stark and Ant Man are sorry, scratch that. We're going to go with Captain America first because he does get the Mind Stone as opposed to the Tesseract. So, Steve Rogers, again, he is dressed in his Avengers 1 garb, so he looks exactly like what he looked like back then. And he goes to get the scepter from the Strike Force, which, again, we don't see until Captain America Civil War, but apparently they were involved in the Battle of New York to some extent. And this is well before they were outed as Hydra agents. So Captain America gets in the elevator with them, and it's a really good callback to the elevator fight scene from Captain America: The Winter Soldier, where he gets in the elevator and he beats the shit out of everybody. Except he does a very smart thing here because he doesn't want to cause too much of a problem, and he basically he whispers into one of the agents' ears. He basically says that he's going to be taking the scepter for transport, when in reality, they're all Hydra agents, so they're going to take the scepter, and eventually it winds up getting in the hands of Baron von Strucker, and that's how Quicksilver and Scarlet Witch get created. So he asks for it, and then they say, "Oh, we're supposed to keep our hands on and stuff like that." And you think a fight's going to break out, and then he just whispers in his ear, "Hail Hydra." And he and he lets him take the case, which is exactly or he lets him take the scepter, which is exactly what a smart Steve Rogers would do instead of just beating the crap out of them. Now, this does come up later where after the scepter gets taken, they find out that Steve Rogers, they think that the Steve that took the scepter is actually Loki because Loki manages to escape, and I'll get to that in a minute. But uh, that Steve winds up getting into contact with his version, the 2012 version of Steve Rogers. So the two Steve Rogerses fight, which is pretty entertaining, until the 2012 Steve gets the current Steve in a headlock and is about to choke him out. When Steve barely manages to get out, Bucky is alive, and because of the shock of the statement, because again Captain America didn't know that at that point, he touches the scepter to his counterpart's chest and is able to erase his memory and knock him unconscious. So Captain America now has the Mind Stone. So now we have all of the stones in our in possession, except for the Space Stone, which is still in the Tesseract. Now Ant Man and Iron Man are both going to try and get that back, but they're basically following the Avengers down from Avengers Tower. They have it in a briefcase. And in order to try and get it, Ant Man is goes inside Tony Stark's chest piece, inside of his arc reactor, the past Tony Stark from 2012, and alters it a little bit to give him a heart palpitation. And because of the distraction, the Tony Stark is able to grab the suitcase with the Tesseract because he's disguised as a Shield agent. Tony Stark then tries to walk away when the Hulk comes out of a stairwell and bowls him over, and the suitcase slides over to Loki open, and Loki just immediately grabs the Tesseract and disappears into a space portal, and he's gone. So this is again where they think Loki escaped, and they think he's masquerading around as Captain America. So that also means that the space stone is gone and they do not know where it is. So the group reunites, and they decide that Hulk and Ant-Man should go back to 2023, I think is what the year would be at that point, back to what would be their present time. But because they have such a low amount of Pym particles and they can't make an extra jump, Captain America and Iron Man are going to go back and get more Pym particles and at the same time get the Tesseract. Now, what we have here is this is kind of where we mend the bonds between Tony Stark and Captain America to an extent, and they go back to the military base that we see in Captain America: The First Avenger and in Winter Soldier when they have the bunker that's the Shield facility. But they go back to like near the beginning of Shield. I think it's 1970 is the year they go back to. So Steve Rogers is dressed as a soldier, Tony Stark is dressed as a scientist, and they are able to get inside the Shield facility because Captain America knows how to get in from the Winter Soldier when they broke into the same bunker. And Captain America goes to get the Pym particles from a young Hank Pym who is working there, and Tony Stark goes to break out the Tesseract and steal that. So we have two different scenes that are going on. The Captain America one's kind of funny, where he calls Hank Pym on the phone and basically says that there's a glowing package in the mailroom that's making people sick, and Hank Pym then rushes down uh, down to the mailroom to try and figure out what the hell is going on, while Captain America steals the remainder of the Pym particles. And there's also a really interesting scene that, again, it kind of relates back to the end of the movie, where Captain America sees Peggy Carter through a window, and he's kind of just, he wants to talk to her, he wants to explain everything and catch up and everything like that, but he knows that he has a mission to do. But again, this factors into the end of the movie very well because it's a precursor to what we're going to see later. So Captain America has got what he wants, and Tony Stark is able to very easily get his hands on the Tesseract. But as he's leaving, he encounters his father, Howard, who again was a founding member of S.H.I.E.L.D., so he's there. Um, and they get into this conversation where basically Tony is masquerading as a man named Howard Potts, and they have this conversation about kids. And at the time, Tony's mother was pregnant with him, so Howard is kind of talking back and forth with Tony about children, because again, Tony has a daughter now. So they have a little bit of a back and forth, and there's this really good moment at the very end of it where Howard Stark says, "He's not even here yet, but I know that I'd do anything for him." And it's kind of this moment that kind of seals all the issues that Tony Stark has had with his father. It kind of seals those up and ends it in a good way. And in reality, this whole movie is almost like an ending for a lot of these characters, whether literally or figuratively. Um, but it's a great moment between them, because you just kind of see the look on Tony's face, like he just got closure on some stuff, because obviously his father is dead in the future, for the majority of his adult life. So he was never able to have really that much of a relationship with him, and just to know that his father cared that much when he thought that he was a very cold and uncaring person for the majority of the films is, it's good for him in a way from an emotional standpoint. But now that Captain America and Tony Stark have the last Infinity Stone and more Pym particles, they return to the Avengers facility, and this is where we go back on our main plot line, because now also you have to remember that the evil Nebula came back, not their Nebula. So the Avengers, except for Nebula, everybody else goes to a little room where the Stark Tech Gauntlet is, and they put the stones into it, but they can't really decide who's going to wear it, who would essentially survive, and the Hulk is really the only one that thinks that he can hold the gauntlet and live. So Hulk puts it on and he snaps his fingers. His arm is annihilated by this thing. His arm gets really, really messed up. Um, and he snaps his fingers and he does manage to bring people back. And we see this because Hawkeye immediately gets a call on his phone uh, from his wife, who was dusted. And he starts talking on the phone. Now, at the same time this was happening, the Avengers were sealed inside of a room because they didn't know what was going to happen when they released all that energy. If it was gonna something was gonna blow up or whatever. But Nebula is back at the time portal, and she's used the Pym particles to shrink down Thanos' ship to bring it through a wormhole, through the quantum realm, and bring it back into their reality. So the ship is then transported directly to Avengers headquarters, where Thanos is essentially hovering over them with a death ship. Um, so after the snap, Hawkeye answers his phone. Ant-Man walks up to the window and looks out and sees the ship. And right as he sees the ship, it fires on the Avengers facility and annihilates the entire Avengers facility. And you don't know who's dead at this point either, because Ant-Man was standing right at the window and he was at the brunt of the blast. So you don't know if he's dead. You have no idea if any of the other members. You see that War Machine and Hulk are like pinned under pretty much the entire building, him and Rocket too. Um, and the rest of the Avengers are kind of up top. Thor and Iron Man and Captain America, the big three essentially, are kind of up top. Um, and this is when Thanos comes down with his forces and basically says that they're going to give the gauntlet, the stones, to him, because if they don't, he's going to kill all of them. And essentially, his whole idea was that they did all the work for him, so he didn't have to do it, and now he can just take the stones and do whatever he wants with them. Uh, and then we have the final battle that takes place, and this is an epic, epic battle. This is an amazing action scene. You have everything you want. You have Thor going at him with Stormbreaker and Mjolnir. You have Iron Man in his new suit, doing his thing. You have Captain America. Captain America has the best moments in this fight where there was this great moment, and again, it builds off that moment from Age of Ultron, where Captain America kind of moves Thor's hammer a little bit, and Thor is basically Thanos is about to put Stormbreaker through Thor's chest, and Thor can't really do much about it. And then you see Mjolnir come towards him, but Mjolnir passes him and goes right to Captain America. And it's a great reaction by Thor, because Thor just looks at him and says, "I knew it." Again, it's a great reaction, and Captain America just goes ape shit on Thanos. It is so great. Hits him with a thunderbolt. I mean, that's probably one of the best scenes I've ever seen in an Avengers film. Is just Captain America with Thor's hammer and his shield. But even Captain America is overwhelmed after a point. His shield is damaged by Thanos' massive sword weapon. Um, and it looks like kind of everything's lost until, and also the people that are trapped under the building, Ant-Man's going down there to try and save them. But when it seems like everything's lost, then you see all these portals start to open, and they're all the Doctor Strange portals, the magic portals, and you see all of these characters that we thought were dead that have now been brought back by Hulk snap, and everybody shows up. everybody from the MCU that's alive that was snapped out shows up. The only ones that really don't are Black Widow, because she was killed using to get the Soul Stone. She can't be brought back for whatever reason. And Vision is not there as well, obviously because his the Mind Stone is in the Gauntlet. Um, but every single other, but Black Panther, Spider-Man, the Guardians of the Galaxy, um, everybody, Winter Soldier, Falcon. There's actually a great moment where Captain America hears on a headset from Falcon, and Falcon just goes, "On your left." Again, it's like Captain America: The Winter Soldier, which again was a Russo film, Russo brothers film, and he flies through a portal right near him, and then you see T'Challa comes out with uh, Shuri, and keep forgetting the bodyguard's name. Um, Spider-Man comes back. All of the Avengers are back, plus armies. The Wakandan army is there. Some of the remaining Asgardians, a shit ton of people just show up, and Doctor Strange comes through, and then Thanos brings out all of his forces, and it's just an all-out onslaught. And then on top of that, Ant-Man makes himself into Giant Man and saves everybody that's trapped underneath the buildings. So War Machine, Rocket, and Hulk are back in the mix too, and in addition to himself. So then it's uh, and Captain America says it, and it's one of the best lines in the movie. Avengers assemble, and then they go to town, and we have this amazing battle. Again, there's a few moments in it. Spider-Man meeting Tony Stark on the battlefield is a big one where he's trying to like explain what happened to them when they got snapped, and Iron Man just essentially just grabs him and hugs him. And again, it's a great moment where you kind of see that things have kind of come full circle for Tony Stark. Is that Peter Parker was one of the big motivations for him to get his head back in the game, and now he succeeded, and that's to see Peter Parker again. Again, it's like a father seeing a son in a way, or maybe a teacher and a protege might be a better analogy. But ultimately the battle leads down to uh, one moment. And early on in the fight, after everybody comes back, Iron Man asks Doctor Strange if this is the one chance he was talking about, and he says, Doctor Strange, says if he tells him, it won't happen. So Iron Man, at the end of the battle, and actually, sorry, before I go into that, basically the entire idea of them battling now is they're trying to get the gauntlet to the quantum realm portal because they need to get the crystal. They need to get the stones somewhere safe where Thanos can't get his hands on them, even if he defeats them. So we see a few different characters carrying it. Black Panther has it for a little while, then Spider-Man takes it. Spider-Man starts to get overwhelmed. So then all of these female Avengers come in. You have Wasp, you have Gwyneth Paltrow, you have Valkyrie, and a few others as well. And everybody comes in and uh, they help transport the gauntlet as far as they can until Thanos decides to pull out his ace and start firing on them with his ship. So at this point, Captain Marvel makes her appearance and destroys the ship, much like she did at the end of her own film. And then she comes down and tries to basically beat up Thanos, where Thanos now has gotten his hands on the gauntlet. But she's basically keeping him occupied enough so that he can't use it. Um, but when looks like she has the upper hand, Thanos actually takes the Power Stone out of the gauntlet, holds it in his free hand, and uses it to punch her in the face and knock her unconscious. Now he reintroduced, and at the same time, Tony Stark is kind of recovering. He was just got the crap kicked out of him a little bit by Thanos. But now he realizes what he has to do, and Thanos puts the Power Stone back in the gauntlet right as Tony Stark grabs the gauntlet and kind of has a wrestling match with Thanos, but Thanos manages to get the gauntlet back. Now, this is possibly the greatest moment in the MCU ever. And Thanos snaps his fingers and nothing happens. And then he looks at the back of the gauntlet and all the stones are gone. And what Tony Stark did was he used the nanites in his armor to remove the stones from Thanos' gauntlet. before he had a chance to get it back. So Tony Stark now has all the stones, and Tony Stark forms them into a gauntlet over his own hand. And there's a great line where Thanos, right before he's about to snap, he says, "I am inevitable," and he snaps and nothing happens. And then Tony Stark does the same thing, except he says, "I am Iron Man," and he snaps his fingers, and Thanos and all of his forces are turned to dust. And unfortunately for Tony Stark, unlike the Hulk, he is not powerful enough to use the Infinity Stones and escape with his life. And Tony Stark winds up dying in a very emotional scene. Peter Parker is there, Gwyneth Paltrow is there, War Machine's there, all of the people that were very close to Tony, as well as the other Avengers. And Tony Stark passes away on the battlefield, and then we see a funeral for him held at the end, where you see all of the Marvel characters are at a funeral at his home, and they put a little wreath in the water. And you see actually inside the wreath there's Tony's first arc reactor, which still has the little ring around it that says proof that Tony Stark has a heart. Which, if you remember, that was from the original Iron Man film in '08. Um, which I thought was a really touching way to kind of send it off. But again, they go through the crowd. You see all the Avengers. You see everybody that's ever been involved in an Avengers film. You see, apparently, it's the kid from Iron Man 3, but he's a teenager now. A lot of people didn't know who he was, just some random dude in the crowd. But all the Avengers are there, and then you can go back, and like the last person you see is Nick Fury, who again was brought back from the snap. And this is kind of how we sort of end things. We do have a little bit of catch up stuff with some of the other characters where we see, Peter Parker meets Ned again, and T'Challa goes back to Wakanda, and all that stuff. So after the funeral, they had brought the stuff back in order to return the Infinity Stones. And Captain America's job is to return the Infinity Stones to their appropriate times and then come back. So Hulk is about to send him through. Winter Soldier and Falcon are both there waiting for him. So Captain America has Mjolnir and all the stones, and he proceeds to go back. Now Hulk says, "Oh, he'll be back in 5 seconds," and then 5 seconds pass. He doesn't come back. Then it goes 7, 10, 15, and Sam starts freaking out. He starts saying, "Where's Captain America?" Until Bucky gets his attention and points him over to what looks like an old man sitting on a bench, and nobody really knows what's going on until they walk up and they see that it is Steve Rogers. And then it kind of gets explained that Steve went back, and he stayed back. He stayed because he wanted a life, so he went back to Peggy Carter, and he married her, and presumably maybe he had a family or something like that. Because again, I guess it's kind of a different timeline. It's kind of weird the way the timelines work out. But basically, Captain America came back to give Sam Wilson the shield. To the Captain America shield, because he wanted to pass on the mantle. And he even says that he wanted to get one of those lives that Tony Stark always told him to get. Um, but I felt that was a very good send off for Captain America, where he gets his happy ending and he gets to live out his life with Peggy Carter. Um, and that's kind of the thing with this movie, is it's an ending for so many characters, mostly the original Avengers. As for the other original members, Thor goes off with the Guardians of the Galaxy, because the other thing that happens is, even though Gamora wasn't able to be brought back, her original version from that universe, the Gamora from 2014 is still alive, because but essentially she betrayed Thanos and sided with her sister Nebula, and they wound up killing the evil Nebula in the sewer system underneath the Avengers facility. But she then went off, so now Star Lord needs to find her. But at this point, though, this is a Gamora that has not joined the Guardians of the Galaxy, so she doesn't even know who Star Lord is. And there's actually kind of a funny moment where they meet on the battlefield, and I think Gamora kicks him in the balls. But that's kind of where they're off to now, and Thor is kind of joined up because he wants to kind of go out and see things now. Because, as he says, this is the first time in 1,000 years I haven't had my path set for me, and he doesn't know where to go or what to do. So Thor's going off. So I don't know if that's going to be Guardians 3 or if it's going to be Thor 4 or how that's going to work. I know Guardians 3 is definitely coming out, but it'll be interesting to see. And Thor leaves Valkyrie in charge of the Asgardians that are back on the planet. So, or back on Earth. Uh, so they go off. So again, Rocket's with them as well. And we kind of see where all those characters are at, and then at the very end we get a shot of Captain America and Peggy Carter inside this little house, and they're sharing a kiss to a dance, which is again kind of a callback to the first Captain America film. So I know this has gone a little long, but it's a long movie. It's a very long movie. Thank you for listening if you've listened this long. But again, Endgame is an ending. It is a finite ending to that first part of the MCU for many of those characters. I mean, obviously, Iron Man and Black Widow were both dead. Captain America essentially retired. Thor is still in the mix. And Hawkeye is now reunited with his family, but he's again kind of retired. So really, Thor and Hawkeye are the only ones that come out of it essentially unscathed. Whereas Hulk, apparently, the damage to his arm is pretty much permanent, I guess, because of the Infinity Stones. Again, the Russos stated that, but that could also change. But there's a lot going on there. And now you kind of have the newer characters that are going to have to carry things forward, which will be interesting. And again, I plan on going to see Spider-Man Far From Home this summer because the trailers did get me interested in that film. So we'll see how that goes. But, you know, Infinity War, sorry, not Infinity War, Endgame is a perfect companion piece to Infinity War, but it is also a completely different film. And the only complaints that I saw about Endgame was people were going in and expecting it to be a nonstop action fest. It's not a nonstop action fest. The last battle is amazing, and the build up to it is great. But you have to understand that this is the first film, Infinity War. That was Thanos' movie. This movie is all about the Avengers and all about them coming together and putting aside their differences and getting shit done, and some of them paying the ultimate price for it. That's ultimately what this is this is almost the purest Avengers movie I think I've seen thus far, where Thanos essentially has a complete backseat in this. He got all of his development in Infinity War. We learned all we needed to about him in Infinity War. We didn't need to learn anything about him here, and they just went full on with the Avengers, and I loved it. I loved this movie. This movie is great. I can't give it enough praise. And again, it's one of those films that I don't know how they're ever going to top it if they do a future Avengers film. And I don't think they can. Personally, I don't think they can unless you have another 10 or 11 years of build up and then you have another one. But, only time will tell. But as far as doing a rating, I would have to give this movie uh, 10 America's asses.
Mr. Rogers, I almost forgot that suit did nothing for your ass.
No one asked you to look, Tony.
It's ridiculous.
I think you look great, Cap. As far as I'm concerned, that's America's ass.
Out of 10. So I'm not gonna put it on the list or whatever. I'm not gonna put it on the MCU list. I would say it's probably tied at the top for me right now because Infinity War and Endgame it's almost like watching one movie, one 5.5 hour movie. And that's the other thing is this movie's 3 hours. It does not feel like 3 hours when you watch it. It feels like a 2 hour movie, which is a credit to the directors. And again, I don't mean that in a bad way. I mean that in a very good way. But this video has gone on for a long time. Thank you for listening if you have listened this long. And remember that if you have any comments on this, put them down in the comments. Hit the bell for notifications. Hit the like button. Subscribe. And remember, I live my life free of compromise. Do you?